I'm Ken. So this Christmas I got a great gift, the first 3 issues of Inquest magazine. Inquest was all about card games, but particularly about Magic. I loved all the art spreads, I loved poring over the price lists, and I loved looking at the deck lists, but as a kid I never really read the articles. So this Christmas I sat down and I read the first 2 issues. One article stood out to me. It's the editor's letter from the June 1995 issue, and its title is Wanted, Channel Fireball, Rise to Arms, Begin Your Own Ban the Channel campaign. So in this article, Inquest editor Michael Searle describes how bad the Channel Fireball combo is. He tells us that his local meta has already banned Channel, and at the end of the article, he asks Wizards to do the same. Now, how that combo worked. So you would cast Channel, turn your life total, except 1 point, into colorless mana, and then sink all of that colorless mana into a lethal fireball. GG. One paragraph from this letter stands out. I love cheeseheads. Cheeseheads think a theme deck is a decision between fireballs or disintegrates. They confuse winning with fun. I guess hitting someone with a 19-point fireball is fun for some folks, but not to me, nor anyone with whom I play Magic. So let's keep that paragraph in mind as we learn about Magic's early days and as we try to define these 2 words, casual and competitive. This is an essay in 4 parts. August 1993. Magic debuts at Gen Con. It's a huge hit. Wizards can't keep up with demand. And the first tournament's only deck construction rules are thus. Show up with at least 40 cards, and if you're not playing for ante, don't include any of the cards that mention it. That's it. Magic players solved this proto-format in 4 months. 93's most elegant deck consisted of 18 Time Twisters, 21 Black Lotuses, and 1 Brain Geyser. And the way the deck worked is that you would loop Time Twisters and Black Lotuses into one another, netting mana per loop, drawing yourself cards with Brain Geyser if you needed more gas, and otherwise pouring all that mana into a lethal Brain Geyser and decking your opponent. Literal big brain plays. So this was the era known as Wild Magic. And this was Wild Magic's most powerful and consistent combo deck. I learned all this from Schools of Magic, History of Vintage, an excellent ebook by Stephen Menendian, and that ebook details people's response to this combo deck and other decks like it. Tournament organizers developed their own deck restrictions, and there was little consensus or conformity. Some organizers required Highlander decks, decks with no more than 1 copy of any card except basic lands, or permitted no more than 6 copies of a given card aside from land. Some placed extra restrictions on artifacts, such as 1 copy of each artifact per deck, or just increased the minimum card restriction to 60 and beyond. To unify these rules, Wizards created the Duelist Convocation, the precursor to the DCI. From that same ebook, for DC-sanctioned tournaments, the Convocation recommended, but did not require, that decks should have a minimum of 60 cards, with no more than 1 of any artifact, and no more than 4 of any non-basic land. These recommendations quickly became standard practice for most players. 2 things stand out so far in this history. 1, Magic players quickly found out how to win as efficiently as possible. And this pattern is common. You give a group of humans with shared interests a mechanical problem to solve, and they're going to solve the hell out of it. 2nd, the Duelist Convocation made recommendations first, not rules. So this reminds me of Commander's philosophy document, particularly this bit that I'm going to read now. Commander is designed to be a malleable format. We encourage groups to use the rules and the ban list as a baseline to optimize their own experience. So what happened next? In January 1994, just 5 months after the game's debut, Wizards and the DC published Magic's most important and foundational rules change. The new rules, quote, affirmed the 60-card minimum rule, as well as the rule prescribing a maximum of 4 of any non-land cards. They released a banned and restricted list with the goal of limiting those cards that in certain combinations with other cards create situations that disturb game balance. They banned cards mentioning the ante-rule, and the sideboard was created in order to discourage people from relying on overly narrow strategies. It's fair to say that the most important rules change in Magic's history was a consequence of fast combo decks. So what's all that tell us? Well, first, it tells us that fast combo is always going to be Magic the Gathering's edge case. If a player can quickly and consistently win games without other players being able to affect substantially those games, the game's rules should be discussed, maybe even reconsidered. And two, fast combo is always going to be a feature of Magic. It's a feature, it's not a bug. And the difference between feature and bug is this. Can a combo be slowed or prevented often enough that other kinds of decks and other kinds of strategies have a chance of winning? And if the answer to that question is no, start by fixing the problem locally, and then worry about organizing at a larger scale and convincing WotC to make a change. Or, in our case, the rules committee. Before we jump forward in time, I want to discuss just a little bit the ante-rule. So originally, the ante-rule required each player to reveal the top card of their opponent's library after they shuffled up, and those cards that were revealed would go to the game's winner. So flip your opponent's Black Lotus and then beat them with your Curd Ape deck. Congratulations, you've just won a $30 card. The ante-rule was originally meant to mitigate what Richard Garfield, Magic's creator, called rich kid syndrome. And Richard worried that people with more money would buy up all the best cards and thus always have the best decks. He didn't want Magic, a collectible card game, to also be pay to win. So the ante-rule would, in theory, let more skillful players or players who had brewed meta-busting decks beat the players with the expensive cards, win them, and thus circulate those cards within Magic's little economy. Banning and restricting cards was WotC's replacement for the ante-rule. So maybe they thought that banning and restricting cards would constrain costs and redistribute valuable cards just about as well as the ante-rule. Or maybe they realized that selling extremely popular collectible objects while also requiring people who use those objects to occasionally lose them wasn't really sensible. But regardless, with getting rid of the ante-rule, Magic became, and I'll just say it, to some degree, pay to win. I wonder how we could address that problem today. All Magic formats were variations on the rules established that January 1995, until 2002, when Elder Dragon Highlander made its debut. EDH was created by Adam Staley in Fairbanks, Alaska. He created the format because his playgroup was tired of playing against a small number of decks in the competitive tournament scene. And by requiring all 100 cards of your deck to be different, you'd be forced to play cards that wouldn't otherwise be seen. So EDH was created initially to bring about novel game states. A couple years later, Sheldon Menery, and big shout out to Sheldon and everybody else publicly living with and healing up from disease. That's a super hot look. I love it. Mwah, chef's kiss. Keep it up. Sheldon introduced a streamlined version of EDH to WotC employees and Star City Games online audience. In that first article, he describes his first EDH deck, writing, quote, "There are some cards that you might wonder why I'm not playing. Palinchron is the first that comes to mind. It was in the original build, but after I tutored him up with Mirari's Wake in play and Capsize in my hand a few times, it got boring. It's a great combo, but after a while, it became a snooze fest." Sheldon ends the article with a deck building challenge. The goal? Brew a cool deck that, quote, turns Lord Tressorhorn's drawbacks into advantages. EDH's creators wanted EDH games to feature old, outmoded, and jank cards alongside powerful ones. They wanted the format to accommodate the sort of widest range of nostalgia. And, importantly, they wanted EDH games to be long, complicated, and surprising. Now, I see in EDH's beginnings a few patterns that still exist today. The first is thinking of Commander as primarily not competitive Magic. EDH was at first a product of dissatisfaction and boredom with tournament Magic and its narrow card pool. The second thing that I notice is an enthusiasm for jank and combat-oriented decks, and conversely, a scorn for combo decks. Adam thought competitive Magic's small list of powerful cards boring, and Sheldon thought Magic's efficient infinite combos boring. The Commander community still shares the sentiment that janky Rube Goldberg machines or combat decks that take a while to win are here in the format's true center, and that powerful combo decks that can win quickly and consistently are really best left over there in the format's kind of unfortunate fringe. And I think much of this sentiment is defined by that early desire for long games. So this is worth noting, right, and questioning, because our attention spans have changed since 2005, or I'll speak for myself, mine certainly has, as we adapt to process more and faster daily information. I kind of bet that desire for long games is going to continue to diminish. I mean, I know I get antsy if a Commander game lasts longer than an hour. So those desires and beliefs are present in Commander's early days. And I suspect that those desires and beliefs are at least a little bit parallel to InQuest's letter from the editor. And yes, I'm aware that something can't be a little bit parallel. It's either parallel to another line or not, whatever. So let's do an experiment. See if this following paragraph sounds like something you've read online, maybe even recently. I love CEDH players. CEDH players think brewing a Commander deck is a decision between Thassa's Oracle or Labman. They confuse winning with fun. I guess comboing out on turn 1 or 2 is fun to some folks, but not to me, nor anyone with whom I play Magic. The CEDH scene has grown recently because of CEDH content creators welcoming outreach, but versions of that paragraph above are still common. And I'm wagering now that this tension is a result of the beliefs and desires of EDH's creators. This tension has recently been called the casual competitive split, and it exists ideologically. Some so-called competitive players and so-called casual players think each other to be intolerant and bad for the format, but I want to know if this split exists outside the realm of belief. Is it fundamental to Commander, the format that we love? So I'll define those terms, casual and competitive, to hopefully answer this question. And I'm not claiming that this account is authoritative or the only way to think about these things. I just wanted to kind of complexify, deepen the conversation a bit. And hopefully, going forward, we can keep some of this context in mind. So let's start by remembering that casual and competitive aren't properties or qualities of individual Magic cards. So even powerful cards like Force of Will, for example, can be used to protect Z-Drew, giving someone their Swirl the Mists. So are casual and competitive noticeable qualities of decks, if not single cards? Maybe. That seems more likely to me, because if you compare like a Grixis competitive Turbo Naz deck to my buddy Z-Drew deck that's donating Swirl the Mists to players, one is clearly able to win more frequently and faster and more consistently than the other. The fast deck has a clearer goal, maybe a more narrow goal, and it has a high density of cards that support that goal, whereas the Z-Drew deck might try to do a little bit of everything with a general picture of how it would wrap up the game in its favor. That said, the Turbo Naz player could, this is theoretical, but it could happen, they could just resolve a turn 1 ad nauseum, draw a bunch of cards, lose a bunch of life, and then move to cleanup. So deck building matters, is what I'm trying to show you, but intent matters more. Casual and competitive, I think, are best described as mindsets. If I've got a casual mindset, I'm not trying to win consistently or quickly. And if I've got a competitive mindset, I am trying to win consistently and quickly. Yet competitive players don't just play the fastest, most consistent decks, right? They still play decks that they like. The CDH brewer, Michael Levine, he plays a mono-white Heliod list that it very often wins games, but it's not the format's best deck. It's not the competitive online meta's best deck by far, but it doesn't matter because he likes the deck, so he plays it. Another example, my CDH deck, Siskel and Ebert, Kark and Sakashima, It requires me to flip coins. One time in a competitive game, I cast Faithless Looting 4 times and failed to resolve it once. So I spent 4 red mana to draw no cards in a competitive game. And again, this was because of unlucky flips. But I choose to play this deck because I designed it and I enjoy it. And I think it can be pretty damn strong. I still won the game though.
A lot of tight shit. Like, that's really sick. And I'm cute.
In other words, desire matters. Commander players with a competitive mindset also want to have fun. And they have fun while playing the game, not only when they win the game. Because it's fun to learn and become better at something, better at an activity that you're freely choosing to do. So we've got the competitive mindset defined. Players with a competitive mindset play to win quickly and consistently. And the word play there connotes both fun and desire. So what about the casual mindset? Let me take a quick detour. Here are the first and last sentences of the Commander Rules Committee's philosophy document. Commander is for fun. And the format can be broken. We believe games are more fun if you don't. So I like the philosophy document. It paints a nice looking picture about what EDH can offer players. But those sentences suck. Here's why. So if you're gonna lead and end a document of guiding principles with a claim about fun, you've got to define it. And unfortunately, defining fun is about as effective as explaining the punchline to a joke. Everyone plays Commander to have fun. In fact, I'd venture to say that everyone plays Magic to have fun, even competitive players. Now, they have more at stake when they play than, say, I do as a Commander player, but they still play to enjoy it. Maybe only 10 people in the world, shout out to the Command Zone crew, big love, make rent partially or completely because they play and talk about Commander. So saying that this game is for fun is imprecise and redundant. And combined with a claim that uses the euphemism broken, these sentences, I think, entrench those desires and beliefs present at EDH's beginnings, but that may not be shared by the whole Commander community at the moment. So quick footnote about the words broken, busted, abuse, and degenerate, right? These words are thrown around all the time. I'm going to stop using them, and here's why. I think they're imprecise. I think they're ableist. One connotes violence, right? Abuse. That's not a word that I want to use about, talking about giving an elf a nice sword and generating infinite tree energy or whatever. And the other word, degenerate, it carries a horrible historical weight. So if you hear or see me using those words, just please DM me and take me aside privately and say, hey, you said you wouldn't use those words. And I'll say, thank you very much, and try to kind of course correct. So let's define the casual mindset like this. Players with a casual mindset play to experience novel situations. Now, I think that definition is faithful to the format's creator's desires. And I think it also provides a nice difference. It provides a nice contrast to the competitive mindset. So an immediate screaming caveat. CDH players are always looking for that new hotness. They're always brewing. They're always trying out new tech. They're always questioning and rethinking their strategies and play patterns. Commander players with a competitive mindset also want novelty. They want to experience new game states. That said, experiencing novelty isn't the primary motivation of players with a competitive mindset. It just can't be, because the card pool for decks that win consistently and quickly is pretty narrow, particularly compared to the card pool for non-competitive Commander decks, because that is literally the entire history of Magic cards except the tiny little ban list. But we've got working definitions for casual and competitive mindsets. We've got definitions that allow us to move forward and hopefully build. So the casual competitive split, in my eyes, is just a difference between two mindsets. And that's great news, because a mindset is a way of thinking. It's really a verb. It's not a noun. Sometimes, right, we act one way because we want one thing. We're operating with one kind of mindset. And other times we act a different way because we want something else. Our mindset has changed. All Commander players have both casual and competitive mindsets. Let me show you an example that I think illustrates this. I think that we change our mindsets turn to turn, right? Imagine you're trying to make your janky Rube Goldberg Z-Drew machine work, and then they talk a little shit, right? They talk down your plan or your deck or your cards. So in that case, it might be time to get a little competitive. You might feel the desire to wrap up the game or really flex and show your opponents what the deck can do and win. But now imagine that you're gunning for the win. Say you're playing some Grixis Turbonauz deck, and you see an opponent start this chain of spells and abilities that just seems totally wild to you. And you decide for the moment, I want to see this chain just continue until the deck explodes in a fiery mess. And so in that moment, you might get a little casual. Maybe you don't throw the game, but maybe you don't counter that one spell because you're curious where the game will go if you don't. Again, casual and competitive are mindsets. Mindsets are verbs, which means that they change often. This means no single EDH player is just one kind of EDH player. So if that's true, then that letter from 1995 from this issue of InQuest magazine is the earliest example I've found of this confusion. We're living in that confusion's consequences. But we can clarify our thinking. And I think by clarifying our thinking, we'll alleviate some of these tensions, some of these supposed differences that are making it difficult to just be a Commander player online and to play the game you love and to say what you think about the game. And I think that we will just naturally alleviate those tensions and naturally clarify our thinking just by playing and discussing, thus changing the game. I mean, it's essentially our format, after all. Commander players share so many practices and desires, and I think that we have more in common than we know. Thanks for watching.